I'm very excited about today's topic and today's guest. We have Janine Rogan. She is the CEO of the Wealth Building Academy, and she's also the author of The Pink Tax, Dismantling a Financial System Designed to Keep Women Broke. I'm really excited. Let's get into the conversation. Welcome to Turning the Page, the destination for entrepreneurial minds that are looking to take their business to the next level. I'm Chris Reynolds, and we'll dive deep with the visionaries, innovators, top advisors, and experts to give you actionable insight that you can implement today. No matter where you're at in your entrepreneurial journey, we have the lessons and insights to help you build a better business. So let's get started. Understanding the needs and desires of our clients is so important to building a great client experience. And especially in an industry that has been, traditionally very male-driven. So in this type of industry, understanding the needs of women in the financial space is crucial for all modern financial advisors. And we often hear about the wealth gap talked about in the news. There are social, cultural, and economic structures that disproportionately affect women's financial outcome. And these are facts. And so, I was very interested in this topic. And as a result, we have somebody who's literally an expert in these types of things. And so joining us today on our podcast is somebody who's passionately shining a light on this topic and really doing something about it. So today we have Janine Rogan. So who is Janine? She's the founder and CEO of the Wealth Building Academy. It's an award, and she's an award-winning CPA. And she tells me her mission is to educate and empower women to confidently and profitably grow their wealth through financial equality for all, which is a very good mission. She's been featured in all kinds of international media. She's delivered keynotes to thousands of individuals and companies around the world. She's also the co-host, or she's a fellow podcaster. She co-hosts the Pink Tax podcast, where she and Tara Faria smash the patriarchy $1 at a time. I like that. We're going to be talking about that. Janine is a University of Alberta alumni. I was also born, we were just talking about it, in Calgary. Born and raised in Edmonton, Alberta. So we have that rivalry going, which we'll also probably talk about, and is currently pursuing her Master's of Economics of Sustainability at Torrens University in Adelaide, Australia, which is great, interesting. She also has a book, which everyone should buy and read, The Pink Tax, Dismantling the Financial System Designed to Keep Women Broke. Multiple studies, research statistics, and her own experiences to shine the spotlight on these types of issues. So, Janine, welcome to Turning the Page.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for that introduction.
But instead of me going on and on, how about you tell us your story? How did you get here?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I actually started university in the Faculty of Engineering and decided yeah.
Wow.
I was good at math in high school, and I was told, be an engineer, you're great at math. And I quickly found myself as one of three women in my first year engineering class. And then after about one semester, quickly decided that this was maybe not a great decision that I had made. Engineering was definitely not for me. No. And so kind of as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up, I stumbled into a couple of classes, one being accounting, and I obviously ended up graduating with an accounting degree and my CPA designation, but I also ended up taking a human ecology course, and there is a course called Family Finance at the University of Alberta, and in that class we had to do a book report, and the book that we ended up doing was The Automatic Millionaire, and that was really the first time that I understood or started to understand that my money could work for me, not just in the traditional sense of like putting it in a savings account, going and getting, your bank book updated, but actually learning to invest and having that money work really hard for you. And so kind of as I was doing my accounting degree and designation, I was finding that I was giving advice from an accounting and finance perspective to some of the biggest companies in Canada. I was, filing some of their tax returns. I was auditing them, and nobody was teaching me about how to invest my money and how to grow my own wealth. And, it really stood out to me when I was talking to one of my managers who had, at that time, I think it was like 50 grand in cash in his TFSA. And I was like, how is it that
What?
CPA,
Right.
yeah, we're supposed to be good with money. We're giving all this advice to companies. How is it that this CPA is now keeping all this money in cash? And, I thought to myself, if this is happening in the CPA world, then it's definitely happening to people who are not in the finance industry. And so, as the years went on, I was kind of doing this work off the side of my desk, running workshops, writing articles for financial institutions. And then the pandemic hit. And at that point, I was in the tech space. But that's really when I found that I needed to start to pivot what I was doing. So at that point, I also found out I was pregnant 4 days into lockdown, which I don't know if I recommend now looking back.
Yeah.
But that's really when I started doing the research for my book, because I felt that the conversations in the financial industry were like, women can't have as much wealth as men because we buy too many lattes, or avocado toast is why we can't buy houses. And I was like, that is not it.
That doesn't sound right. Yeah.
So that's really what led me to the research for my book, and ultimately becoming self-employed and doing this work full time.
Oh, see, I love that story. See, you found your inspiration, you followed your passion, and here we are now, a best-selling author and on my podcast. So think of that.
And nothing against engineers. They're lovely people. It just was not the faculty for me.
I'm with you. And also, if you're a financial advisor, engineers are terrible clients too. They ask a lot of questions, so they can be good and bad, depending on what kind of advisor you are. So let's talk about, how you got it, the pink tax. I think this is a great concept, a great thing to really, to your point, shine a light on. Can you break it down for us? Like, how does it, manifest itself in everyday financial decisions? Like, what were you seeing out there, and why did you go down this path?
Yeah, and we called it the pink tax. The book is not in the traditional sense about the pink tax the whole way through. So the traditional definition of the pink tax was it's a term coined in the 1990s, the pricing difference between men's and women's products. So walk into any grocery store, a razor is going to be more expensive for women than it is for men. If you look at something like hand lotion, men's and women's, might be exactly the same. And they might be the same price, but the women's will have a lower volume. So it might have less ounces or less milliliters. And so that adds up to over $180,000 over the course of a woman's life.
No, really?
And that is not an insignificant amount of money.
That is not an insignificant. It's not something I ever actually stopped to think about. So I'm glad that you brought that. Like, I would not have thought of that, but it's absolutely true.
Where I went with the book and, the mission that I'm on is, of course, those things we should, take into account and consider. But I really do feel like the systems we've set up and some of the things that we kind of expect of women also cost us a lot of money over the course of our life. We know that the wage gap is very real, but we also know that there are examples in the financial industry that end up costing women more money over the course of their lives as well. And that just, continues to add up in conjunction with us being paid less, which ultimately means we have less money to save and invest for retirement. And women typically, in general, live longer than their male counterparts.
That certainly holds true from statistics. So, but is there some like real examples? Like, I know the hand cream is a good one, but in the financial area where you're seeing it's more prevalent in the different decisions?
Well, I think one that is, I think it's quite sinister actually, but when we look at, how credit is created, and you might have, you and myself, let's pretend, let's use that as an example. So if I'm being paid less than you, but we both go and get and apply for credit, I'm probably going to be approved for less than you because it's usually based on how much income you have.
Sure.
Again, speaking in generalities. So let's say you have a $10,000 credit limit and I have a $5,000 credit limit. Now, let's say we both go and buy a TV or something for $3,000. I don't know if TVs are $3,000. I haven't bought a TV in like 10 years.
Sounds right, though.
What ends up happening is now my credit utilization is a lot worse than yours, right? I'm using a higher percent of my credit card. So when that gets reported to the credit bureau, that will impact my credit score in a negative way. Now, when both of us go and apply for a mortgage, obviously, again, there's lots of things to take into consideration. But if we were just looking at it from a credit score perspective, if my credit score is lower than yours, it is likely I will be quoted a higher interest rate on my mortgage, which means I'm now paying more interest than you
Right.
on something on the same, let's say on the same house.
Right. Exactly the same thing.
So this is how, yeah, so this is how things like that get perpetuated, right? I'm paid less, so therefore I have less credit. We buy the same item, but the way the system is designed, my credit score is going to be impacted more substantially than yours.
That is a good example. And again, one that probably wouldn't dawn on most people unless they really, saw it in action, saw these kind of patterns happening.
Yeah, because it's not something that is, you and I walking into a store and both of us buying a razor that's kind of happening in real time. It's something that's drawn out over the course of a woman's life, right? What she makes and what she has, and by the time she gets a mortgage, that potentially is 5-10 years down the road. So there's so many things obviously that can impact it along the way, but that is one thing that we might not be considering.
Yeah, no, and it's probably adds up to a lot of money over to your point, let's say a 20-year amortization. That can be quite substantial if it's a difference of interest rates. As one of my mentors once told me, strategy is perfect, people are messy. And especially when it comes to the wealth management business, people are messy. So one of the things I'd love to find out is, how do you handle client behaviors? What do you do to help them understand some of the behaviors will actually be harming themselves? I would love to have a virtual coffee with you. Just go on the show notes, hit the button, and let's get together and have a good chat. Well, it's free to do. We're both investing time to learn from each other. So have a click. We'll have a virtual coffee, and maybe we'll learn something. Now, most of my audience are financial advisors, entrepreneurs and financial advisors. So as financial advisors, how can they better understand the unique financial challenges women encounter? Like what should they do to go about it? Because, as you know, women are making more money. They're making more decisions now. They're a bigger part of people's practices. And to your point, they're outliving their male counterparts. And so they may be thrust into a position where they have to make very big decisions on big sums of capital in a very short period of time. So any tips, any advice that you can give the audience?
Yeah, I think number one, and this one sounds so simple, but it's talk to your clients. I know so many women, and there's so many statistics to support that women leave their financial advisors after their spouse dies or after they get
Yeah,
divorced.
actually, that's true. What is it? 80 something percent leave their
Yeah,
advisors.
80%.
It's a big stat.
Which to me is saying women aren't feeling heard.
Right.
If I'm, going to this financial advisor with my husband and he's not talking to me, if I ask a question and he answers it, or the advisor answers it looking at my husband,
Right.
I'm going to feel dismissed. I'm going to feel talked down to. Of course I'm going to leave. Like, I don't want to feel like that. So I think number one is, talk to the women also, have them involved. And it sounds so simple, but I think we just automatically sometimes do it, or maybe you connect with the guy better, but don't dismiss the other person in that relationship, and seek to understand where they're at as well, because I think sometimes I think in the financial
No.
industry we do
Yes.
a really good job of throwing a lot of jargon at people, and that can be overwhelming.
Absolutely. Yep.
And so, I don't want to say like dumb it down, but, ask where that person is at, understand, what gaps they might have in their knowledge, and kind of seek to understand and help them, fill that gap.
What kind of questions should advisors be asking of, their clients? What are some of the good questions that really bring out, some of those things that you mentioned? Are they being heard? What are their objectives? How can they meet them? In your experience, what are the things that you've experienced as it relates to, the right questions to bring that information out?
I found this, and I'm happy to send it over. It's a free, like, it's not a quiz, but it's a stress scale.
Mm.
And it's quite well known in the psychology space. And basically there's all these list of things that can happen in your life. So like death of a spouse, that
Right.
obviously is like top of the stress scale, right? And there's points associated with it. But, it goes all the way down to things like job loss, your partner getting promoted, you getting promoted, vacation is on there, and it has stress points for all of them. And I think, approaching it from and you could use this with your clients, it's a great tool, but understanding the things that actually have happened in your client's life over the past year, because I guess the point of this stress scale is how likely you are to burn out in the next 2 years. And so if you have really, really high stress, you're more likely to experience
Right.
burnout or experience an adverse medical event. And I think it's really hard for someone to care about the efficiencies of tax planning for a certain fund in their registered account when their partner just lost their job.
Right.
They have more responsibilities at work. They have a vacation coming up with their in-laws that's driving them insane or whatever.
Right.
But I think understanding, what's happening in that person's life and what are the big events that are happening will help tailor your advice moving forward.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess also, there's a big responsibility now of people taking care of their parents and, whether they're infirm or taking care of them in their life. So that they have their kids, they have their parents, they have lots of stresses. So to your point, if you don't know this, who cares about the tax efficiency of a mutual fund and a
Yeah.
TFSA? That's not really the biggest thing, right?
Well, and they're not going to care about what you're talking about because their mind is going to be on something else. And so, really, I obviously, like, advisors are always trying to add value, but I think sometimes by just like sitting and listening and understanding what's going on in their life, we might be able to say, like, okay, you have an aging parent, should we look at, setting aside a certain amount of money to help 5 years from now, manage some healthcare that comes into the home? Or like, what are your parents' wishes with that? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we don't really care about, like, I mean, we do care about tax efficiency, but the average person is not gonna, that's not what money is for, to be the most tax efficient. It's for helping with their everyday life. It's for building the life that they are wanting. It kind of like, what is the point of money if not to enjoy it and spend it? And that might mean, hiring help
Right.
when you have an aging parent.
Yeah. And taking some of that pressure off. So as we started this, the wealth management business has generally been, male dominated, although that is changing. And I see it changing, quite rapidly. I see it at our firm where, we're now over 30 something percent, and rising quite quickly, but that's good. But on the other side, what could men do to better educate themselves on these types of topics? Like, there's no real, other than your source, I searched around and there's not really a lot of areas where you can get some good data on some of the things that we're talking about, the questions to ask. And so what advice would you give someone that they can get better educated on these types of topics?
Yeah. And I think, that is
Your book,
part of the whole
I'm going to throw that out there. Your book, of course. We're going to sell lots of that one. So.
But, that is part of the problem, right? Is there is not a lot of data being collected around these things. When I was researching, I really tried to, always include a Canadian and an American statistic. Obviously, though, in a lot of the situations, I had to include American statistics because there was not Canadian statistics.
Right.
And, I'm also speaking from the point of being a white woman, like the intersectionality we apply to things just makes it worse. And there's even less data. So I think, number one is if you work in a management position, you can absolutely impact change and just start collecting that data. Encourage your company to start understanding, like, are women paid less in my organization? Do we have policies that support, dads or moms? Because I do think that absolutely does help. But, when it comes to understanding the information, obviously, I love that you said my book because I think that that's a great place to start. But, really trying to understand how these things impact women and talking about them with the women in your life. I will, and I share this story in my book, I will forever be grateful to this guy that I do not remember his name because he only worked at the firm I was at for 3 months. But he shared his salary information with me, and I found out I was being paid $13,000 less than he was, and I was training him.
Right. And you were
For
training
the
him.
same role. But without him sharing that information, I was going in to negotiate a $10,000 raise and I still would have been paid less. So having that information allowed me to negotiate a raise that was, on par, if not a little bit higher than this gentleman that I was training. But I think that that's a great step that men can take, is being involved in having those conversations, whether it's around their salary or whether it's around the experiences that they have in the financial industry, and including women in those conversations. Making sure that you are asking, like, hey, I'm investing, let's say, in, I don't know, a startup or
Right.
in my TFSA or whatever it is, and then bringing women into those conversations, because I think for so long we've been left out of them.
Hmm. Yeah, no, very, very good point. Now, are there any like emerging trends or products that you're seeing in the financial services that are, specifically designed to address this? Are you seeing some action being taken?
It's an interesting time. And I probably a month ago would have had a different answer based on probably the president that is in place in the US. There's been a lot of negative talk around DE and I, and,
Yeah.
and I think that that is starting to impact companies. So I'm hopeful that it will stay, but I'm also cautious that there is companies, predominantly in the US, that are rolling back their budget in these spaces, and that to me is like, well, okay, if that is the case, then are we going to see companies not caring about things like the wage gap? But I will say that there are. What's an interesting space to look at is kind of gendered funds. So funds that look to include companies where there's a certain percentage of women in upper management, or the CEO is a woman. There are some funds that sort of follow this. They do typically have higher fees, but I know when I talk to women, oftentimes they want to have an impact with their dollars. And
Right.
I think
Yeah.
this can absolutely be a solution.
Well, we've had on this show, we actually have one of our advisors who sort of more or less specializes, and that is impactful investing for their clients. And she can't keep up with the demand for her services in the city she is. So that, as I said, as much as that sounds like a niche, it is a growing uh to be almost mainstay part of the discussion that you should have with your clients on a regular basis. So, if you had to give one piece of advice to somebody in the wealth management business, what would that be?
Ooh, I can only say one thing. Um,
One
I
big
think,
piece of advice.
hmm, I would say listen to your clients, but I feel like that's such an not it's not easy to implement, because oftentimes we like to talk and not actually listen. So I would maybe say, like, invest in some coaching where you're working with um probably a woman, to understand how you can better learn to listen to your female clients, because I think we all could probably do a better job of that. And I'm thinking of this one coach I know here in Calgary, who is really focused on, motherhood and coaching. And, she really talks about how to have conversations around listening and responding in a way that is not kind of bringing it back to you. So the example she uses is, if you say, like, or if I say, I love skiing, and you say, I love skiing too, that kind of turns the conversation to be about you. Whereas if you
Right.
say to me, like, oh, what do you love about skiing? That kind of keeps it to you understanding more about me. So I think, how we ask questions and how we interact with our clients. I also know that women absolutely love to be, in community. So, creating events where you're bringing women together, I think, is a great way to continue to build the industry in a way that's supportive of women.
No, I think all good ideas. And I know one of the things taught way back when I was an advisor, one of the things that a coach taught me was the speaking ratio. And the speaking ratio is,
Yes.
in an hour, you should talk 15 minutes and your client should be talking 45. And if the ratio is anything less than that, you're talking too much about things that they probably don't care about. So that watch your ratio. What's your speaking ratio? You should be speaking very little and your client should be speaking a lot.
And I think, sometimes again, I'll speak in generalities, but men are pushed to talk about more technical things or their hard skills. But it's really the soft skills that allow you to understand your client, right? Like if you don't know that their parent is sick, how are you going to help them, put money away that will help solve their problem 5 years from now? That's the
Right.
kind of advisor that I'm going to feel really listened to me and helped me with the challenges in my life, not the advisor who's saying, oh my God, the MER on this one is 0.8% and the one is 0.78. Like to me, like who cares, right? My parent is declining. So again, I think it's, tools like that, stress I talked about, and understanding what is actually going on in your parents, or pardon me, your clients' lives,
Right.
and what their long-term goals are, right? Like if they want to have 5 kids, okay, well, what does that look like? Let's model that out. Again, I'm not caring about the MER if that's the situation.
I'm gonna
I'm
say that would be the last thing on your mind if you think about last 5 kids,
But I think, when we're
yeah,
in it every day, like when we're as advisors or as, financial experts, we're in it every day and we get so caught up in like, okay, we got to optimize this, we got to save as much money as possible. And I get that. I love nerding out in Excel too, but the general person probably doesn't care.
no, and I would generally agree with you. And I always put advisors in two categories. There's the ones who try to dazzle you with their investment knowledge and everything, and there's the ones who care about you and the relationship. And of the two, it's always the relationship people who thrive because you'll live and die on this sword, where this will last forever. And to
Absolutely.
your point, not having those soft skills, especially dealing with female clients, that's at your peril because that's who's making all the decisions. I attended a very interesting seminar, and it holds true. Women in their 40s now are making decisions for everyone. They make decisions for their parents, they make decisions for their kids, and they make decisions for their spouse. And I can attest to that. No matter what we're doing, I always turn and like, so what do you think? That's the, that's
Yeah.
the conversation. And if they didn't like the other person, there we're not doing business with them, no matter how
Oh,
technical and how
100%.
great the pitch was. So if you're not likable and you're not really focused on the right things, at your peril.
I'll never forget when we were vehicle shopping, and I really don't like owning a car. I wish I lived in a city where I did not need to drive. I think, you know, part of that is the snow, part of that is the parking. But I will never forget shopping with my husband, and this guy is talking to my husband like, this car has this and this and this and this and this. And he turns to me and goes, "What color do you want the car to be?" And I was like, oh God, this guy has no idea. Because what's the first thing I just said to my husband when we got back in our vehicle? I
Yeah.
was like, we're not buying a car from
Yeah.
him. I don't
Forget
care
about
if
it.
that's the
Yeah.
car we want. We're not buying it from him.
Yep. And that holds true very much in the financial advice business because it's about the relationships, it's about caring, and that's who, and we all know who makes all the decisions. And that was a very interesting study. And as I said, it's held true in my own life, and it's held true in just about everyone else's life that I talked to. So as we're wrapping up here, what's the next big thing for you? So where do you go from here?
Oh gosh. Well, I'm raising a 4-year-old, so that takes a lot of my capacity. And I'm about just over halfway through my master's. So, I'll be
Nice.
finishing that and then probably starting on a second book. But all the while, I continue to educate women through my courses. I have an in-person event coming up in March here in Calgary. And those are kind of the areas that I'm really focused on, connecting women in community and then teaching them the skills they need to learn to invest and learn to build wealth.
This is great. And once again, if someone wanted to get a hold of yourself or get a hold of your book, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah. So I'm all over the internet at Janine Rogan on every social media platform. I was lucky enough to be able to grab that handle. But you can also head over to that'swealthbuilding.com, and there's all the information on, where you can grab my book. If you're interested in taking a course or coming to an event, there are all of those details there.
I love it. Janine, thank you very much for being part of the show. Any final words for our audience?
I think in the times that we're in today, and obviously we know what's going on in the political landscape, there's lots of uncertainty in both Canada and the US. I really do think that, as simple as it sounds, listening to people more to understand their experiences is only going to help us. And so whether that's in an advisor capacity, or if that's other women in your life, I think, to understand what experiences they're going through, we might not even think of them. So really just coming from the perspective of listening to understand, not to solve the problem, I think is going to serve us well over these next number of years.
So I think very sage advice. So Janine Rogan, author of The Pink Tax, Dismantling the Financial System Designed to Keep Women Broke. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Lots of great insights, and I hope people all go and read your book. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining me on Turning the Page. What did you learn from today's episode? If you follow me on LinkedIn, please drop me a comment there. I'd love to chat with you about it over virtual coffee. Send me a message on LinkedIn, or you can do so at our website. The link's in the show notes. I'm Chris Reynolds, and until next time.